The World's Greatest Explorer by Jan Day, illustrated by Janine Mason. "Come down from there," Grandfather shouted, his voice full of the rumble of thunder. Ghosts of rain raced towards the shore. "One last volley, men," Jimmy yelled, and sailed a coconut into the basket below. He slid down as fast as he could. They hurried into Grandfather's house. It was tall, pea green, and leaned toward the sea. Wonders from around the world filled the front room. Jimmy stared out the window. "What will we do?" he sighed. "It could rain for days." "Time to show you the family treasure," Grandfather smiled. He pulled out a wooden chest from a net of spider webs. But when Grandfather opened it, all he showed Jimmy were books and maps. Ugh! They smell like dried seaweed. The journals of great-great-great-grandfather James Earl Silas Tuckingham from England. "Of course they are odoriferous. They're very old," Grandfather said as he picked up one of his books. "Wow, I wonder if great-great-great-grandfather knew any kings with treasures." Jimmy took the book from Grandfather and blew dust off the cover. "I doubt it. James was only 10 when he set sail," Grandfather said. "Hey, that could be me." Jimmy turned to the first page. The Port of Bristol, England. Dear Journal, when first I went down to the sea, I met a botanist bound for the HMS Hound. He was going to hunt new plants to bring back to England. Jimmy sniffed. "No treasure. It sounds boring to me." "Aha," his grandfather said with a smile. "In those days, new plants were as precious as gold. Sometimes the search for their discovery took 2 years. They needed a lot of food sources like pigs, chickens, and goats." Jimmy rolled his eyes. "Wham bam. One of those goats would butt you overboard and you'd be a goner." "At sea, a goat would be your least of your worries," Grandfather said quietly. "Maybe it ate these missing pages," said Jimmy. "The journal is almost 200 years old. It's a wonder any of it survived. Read on." Rainforest of the Amazon, Brazil. Dear Journal, I am a brave explorer, I am. Today we paddled up the Amazon River to hunt for orchids. Jaguars waited to pounce on us. A giant snake hung from the branch of a tree and lassoed me with the end of its tail. It was about to eat me when I tickled its belly. The snake giggled so hard it fell to the ground, and I had the last laugh. My captain said I was as bold a lad as he'd ever seen. I record that we discovered 50 new kinds of orchids today. I myself found 49. "I would have found 100, Jimmy said. Grandfather ignored him and pointed to the drawing of exotic flowers that filled the ship. The botanist found many orchids that had never been seen in England. The ship carried them home in glass houses called Wardian cases.
Cape Horn, South America. Dear Journal, I am a bold explorer, I am. We sped around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. The wind blew so hard the ship lay on her side. St. Elmo's fire flickered through the rigging like the light from witches' lanterns. I sang a song to the sailors so they wouldn't be scared. My captain told me I was as tuneful a lad as he'd ever heard. I'd like to know a sailor song to sing in the dark, Jimmy said. The island of Guam, South Pacific. Dear Journal, I'm a tuneful explorer, I am. Every day I sang songs about flowers and trees and the length of the sea. We sailed for months until we arrived on the island of Guam, far and away in the Pacific Ocean. The captain traded nails and old iron for palms, baskets of coconuts, and yams. Their coconuts tasted sweeter than candy. Pirate cannons boomed from across the waves. We pulled up anchor and raced right out of there. I grabbed the coconuts so they wouldn't roll into the sea. My captain said I was as helpful a lad as he'd ever seen. I would have stayed and fought them all, Jimmy shouted. New Guinea, South Pacific, near Australia. Dear Journal, I am a helpful explorer, I am. We dashed off to New Guinea to collect giant ferns. Soon we heard loud groans and belching. I climbed up to the top of a mountain to see where this terrible beast slept. With one great roar, fire erupted high above me. I swam back to the ship as fast as I could and told of a giant fire-breathing dragon that was very hungry. The men laughed and called it a volcano. At daylight, I saw hundreds of sharks circling the ship. The captain named the waters Shark Bay. He said I was as daring a lad as he'd ever seen. He should have named it after the great-great-great-grandfather, Jimmy sniffed. Jimmy's Bay. He was known as James, Grandfather said. At sea. Dear Journal, I am a daring explorer, I am. Months passed until we again rounded Cape Horn, stopping in the ports of Montevideo and Recife before we made our way through the West Indies and finally into the Gulf of Mexico. By this time, we had many new plants to take back to England. Our ship anchored in a bay in the Yucatan, and we looked for fresh coconuts and other fruits for the long trip home. In the forest, we found 6 monkeys, which we captured and put in a cage to show in London. They screamed and carried on until I fed them guavas. My captain said I was as kind a lad as he'd ever seen. Can I have a monkey? Jimmy danced around the room. You are a monkey. Grandfather chuckled and tossed him a coconut. Yucatan, Mexico. Dear Journal, I am a kind explorer, I am. Just before we set sail, bandits showed up, waving pistols and demanding gold. The monkeys shrieked and whooped and shook their bars. I could tell they wanted to help, so of course I unlocked their cage. They started throwing coconuts right at the bandits' heads. Before long, the bad guys turned tail. The monkeys and I saved the day. My captain said I was as ingenious a lad as he'd ever seen. Does that mean clever? Jimmy asked. My teacher said I was too clever for my own good. Key Biscayne, Florida. Dear Journal, I am an ingenious explorer, I am. A great storm arose and we were blown off course. It raged for days and days. The winds howled louder than the monkeys. On the last day, the ship capsized near land. Everyone and everything washed overboard and floated to shore. The next morning, I found my monkeys tossing coconuts to each other. The hound was in pieces, but everyone was safe. A frigate came by and took the crew back to England, but they couldn't dodge the monkeys' well-aimed coconuts, so they left them here. I stayed behind to take care of my new friends. My captain said he'd miss me. Grandfather closed the last journal. The world's greatest explorer was the first Tuckingham to come to America. Jimmy stared out the window at the palm he'd climbed earlier. Did that tree come from one of the monkey's coconuts? What do you think? Grandfather took out his knife and cut Jimmy a piece of sweet coconut with just a taste of the sea.